Hi everyone, welcome to our new tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to create containers using Docker Compose. So first of all, what is Docker Compose? It's a tool that was developed to help define and share multi-container applications. Let's get going. First thing we're going to do, we're going to create a directory called Compose. We can obviously use any directory name. It doesn't really matter too much. Inside of this directory, we're going to create another directory called src, and this is where we're going to keep our source files. In this case, that's going to be WordPress, same as in the previous example. Now let's create our docker compose file, and as you can see, it has an extension of yml. Now what is yml? YML is a human readable data serialization language, so it's commonly used for configuration files and in application where data is being stored or transmitted. Now let's edit our docker compose file. I'm going to type in nano docker compose, and we're in. First thing we're going to do, we're going to specify which version of docker compose we're using. So let's type in version and then followed by version 3.8. Let's move on to the next line. On the next line, we're going to type in services followed by semicolon. Now what service is going to do, it's going to tell Docker what containers to create. The first container we're going to create is going to be our database, and we can do so by doing the following. We're going to write in database. Now this can be any name. We're just going to call it database because it's easy to remember, and that's exactly what it is. It's going to be our database. Now let's specify what image we're going to use to create this database. So let's type in image, MySQL, semicolon, latest. What this is going to do, it's going to download the latest image of MySQL database from the Docker Hub. Now for our next step, we're going to type in environment. Now for a database to work, it needs the MySQL root password, and we're just going to use password. Now let's save this file, and let's use a command sudo docker-compose up. What it's going to do, it's going to check the content of our file, and it's going to create an image based on the instructions we gave it, and it's going to run it. Okay, now let's verify that this is now running. I'm going to use sudo docker ps, and you can see we have a container running the database. Now let's press Ctrl and C to close this container, and let's go back into editing our Docker Compose file. Let's add a new line, and call it MySQL database. And let's call the database WordPress. Now what this line is going to do, it's going to create a database for us called WordPress, where hopefully we're going to install the data from WordPress. Now let's run this Docker Compose file, and let's issue the sudo docker compose up command. And let's have a look. The database has been created. And we can do so by logging into the container. Once we're in the container, we can use MySQL command, can now see the database is created. Now that we have a database up and running, let's create a web server in our docker compose file. So let's exit. Stop the Docker from running, and let's add the entry for our web server. And as you can notice, it's very important to keep these elements in line with each other. It's very important when writing a docker-compose file. We have to keep all the services in line with each other. First thing we're going to do, we're going to instruct Docker to download the following image: PHP semicolon 8.11 Apache Bullseye. Now what this is going to do, it's going to do the same thing that database did: download PHP and Apache web server all in one. The next line, we're going to type in volumes. Now what volumes does, it maps the folder we specify from our local host, and which is basically WordPress is going to be located in our src folder. And we're going to map it to the folder in the container, which is the default Apache web server folder where we can make requests to. On the next line, we're going to type in ports. And what we're going to do now, we're going to ensure that port 80 on our local host gets mapped to port 80 in the container. Now let's save our Docker compose file. And now we're going to create a index.php file in our src folder. And we're going to just basically create a small one line. It's going to give us the PHP info output. And let's try to access. Actually, no, first thing we need to do is do the docker run command. Docker compose up, apologies. Now it's going to generate our containers. Then we can test out if we've successfully configured the web server. We now have a web server running. If you can remember, in our previous video, we had an issue where WordPress was having fatal errors because we were missing many PHP modules that are required for a WordPress to run. So in this step, we're going to make sure that we fix that before we carry on further with installation of WordPress. The first thing we're going to do now, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to put it in the same directory as the Docker compose file. Let's call this file phpfix.docker file. Now, in this file, we're going to give it some instructions on how to install additional PHP modules. Because this is going to be a Docker file, we need to start by doing from. Now, we're going to use the same image name we used previously. So let's do from PHP semicolon 8.1.1 Apache Bullseye. Now we're going to instruct Docker to run certain commands. We do so by typing in run docker php. We're going to tell it what to install. And then we want it to enable video. Now let's save this file and exit. Now the next step, we have to edit Docker Compose file and make some changes to this part. So at the moment we basically, what we're doing is downloading an image straight from the Docker Hub, but we know this image is missing fundamental modules, PHP modules we need for WordPress to run. So what we want to do instead, we want Docker to build a new image with some of the changes we just created in phpfix.docker file. So now let's change from image to a build, where we are creating a new image. Let's delete the name of the image we were using previously, and instead we're going to specify the file created. We're going to write context, and then we're going to just type in a dot after, and this dot indicates that the file is in the same place as the Docker file, and then we're going to type in Docker file, and then we're going to point to where the location of our Docker file is. So we know it's in the same directory. Let's save our Docker Compose file, but this time we're going to run sudo docker compose up. We're going to have to specify build, because now we wanted to build a new image from our Docker. Let's see what happens. So now it's building the web server and it's executing the commands we gave it, and now it's installing those missing PHP modules. Awesome. So now if we look at our PHP, localhost PHP configuration, and we look for the missing modules, we can see now that they have been installed. Now let's further enhance our Docker Compose file. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to specify a network. So all of these containers are going to belong to the same network. So let's type in networks, and then we're going to give network a name called lamp. Now let's make sure each one of these containers also belongs to that network. Do the same thing with a web server. Now let's make sure that each one of these containers is never stopped. So let's type in restart always, because we will always want them to be running. Let's do the same with this one. Also, let's make sure these containers depend on each other. And for example, what we want to make sure is that the web server depends on, and we're gonna write in the name of the container. What the instruction depends on does, it makes sure that web server is running if the database is running. Now also let's map the database ports like we did for the web server. So we're going to do so by typing in ports, and we're going to map port 3306 to port 3306. Let's save the file and test it. Hopefully everything should be up and running. Now let's add the WordPress files to the src folder. delete the index file, and let's see if the installation is going to go smoothly. Start the Docker again. Let's visit our localhost. Let's fill in our details. So here, instead of localhost, we're going to type in database, because that's the name of our container. Submit. And it's you can see WordPress is unable to create wp-config file, but it's giving us the code we need to paste to create it. So let's just edit the wp-config sample, press save, and rename it. And let's have a look. Let's refresh the localhost. Apologies. And we're good to go. WordPress Docker. Username is Marco. Password is just password. We're going to use Linux, devil's email. I'm just going to install WordPress. Let's log in. Let's visit the front page. And we can see it's up and running. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and catch you in the next one.